think the public pressure campaign has helped with the eviction squatting situation? I mean, for the love, how many Saturdays in a row did Jaskaran Singh, the Bellevue landlord who's got a deadbeat tenant who hasn't paid rent in 2 years, how many Saturdays in a row did he have to lead a protest outside the guy's house, his house, to get attention toward this issue? And I mean, we've talked about this issue a ton on the show. The laws in Washington state are completely backward. I'm not saying there shouldn't be protections for tenants, but our laws are designed to assume the very worst of every single landlord and to assume that if they want to get rid of a tenant, that they must be doing it because they're just horrible, horrible human beings. And I just refuse to believe that. So now we have laws that are set up so you can have someone like Sang Kim, Jaskaran Singh's tenant, who hasn't paid rent in 2 years. Jaskaran hasn't been able to get a court hearing to force him out. Taxpayer funds have been used to pay Sang Kim's back rent to the tune of $50,000. So here you have a guy who has money, has a job, wife has a job, can pay rent, but he's choosing not to. Because why would he, when he can be dishonest and game the system and game the laws and have his rent paid for him by the taxpayers? And can live in a nice house in Bellevue rent-free for 2 years. So I hope and I think that this issue got enough attention that cooler heads are sort of like, okay, we've really got to reevaluate the situation. And we don't know what lawmakers are going to be willing to do in Olympia this coming legislative session, but at least in King County last week on the show, we had the presiding judge, Judge K2 Shaw, who came on and said, effective immediately, they are taking some steps to try to ease the eviction backlog in terms of court hearings. So as new cases come in, they're going to triage them, they're going to attempt to get people hearings within 30 days, much different than like people like Jaskaran, who the court hearing date he was given last month was March of 2025, which is an insane situation. So is it enough though? The courts can only do so much on an island, unilaterally without consulting lawmakers about the laws that are on the books, etc. So we had Judge Shaw on last week to go through this, and we do a segment every Tuesday with the Rental Housing Association of Washington. If you're a landlord, I highly suggest checking them out, rhawa.org. So we invited Sean Flynn with the RHA on to react to the steps that the court is going to take to see whether he's satisfied with those steps. Sean, welcome back to Undivided.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Have we shamed King County into maybe trying to look like they care about the eviction backlog? Is it working?
Well, I mean, I think the judges care because they're the ones dealing with the backlog. And, RHA commends Judge Shaw's leadership on this to get some sort of solutions going forward. And I think the thing to remember too is that the judges don't write the laws. They are stuck having to implement them and rule on them. And so while I'm very excited about and hopeful about the changes that he's changed in terms of how the eviction process will work, he doesn't have control, or any of the judges don't have control over the underlying laws that are still making it take a long time.
Yeah. So let's go through, just practically speaking. I know this isn't going to be a panacea, but what are the changes that you think might actually help?
Oh, the biggest thing that has happened last week with those the process changes, the rule changes, is that when there isn't space on the commissioner's calendar, then those cases will be moved to the civil docket. So what's important for everyone to understand is that most eviction matters are heard in front of what's called a court commissioner. And they have, the court commissioners do a bunch of stuff. They do guardianship work. They hear things about probate. They do, protective orders. The commissioners are sort of the workhorses of our civil system. Now, then there are judges. Judges, they hear trials, they deal with criminal issues, and generally the process was supposed to be an expedited manner for an eviction process. So there was probably an appropriate place to hear them was in the front of the commissioners. It's shorter, more expedited proceedings happen in front of the commissioners. With Judge Shaw's new rules that we can move contested cases when the commissioners don't have time, which they clearly don't have any time anymore, to the judge's docket, it means things will be heard more quickly in front of judges. I don't want to speak for the judges, and there are 50 some of them in King County, but I don't imagine they're very enthused about their calendar being clogged up now too, because our system is already full. Those judges are hardworking civil servants who already had a whole bunch of work in front of them. So adding the evictions to their calendars is going to be challenging for them, but at least it gives a place for those matters to be heard because they just haven't been heard.
Yeah, one of the things I asked Judge Shaw about when we had him on the show last week is like someone like Jaskaran Singh, who's now 2 years into his ordeal. He's been given a court date of March of 2025 at the earliest. And I said, are you going to prioritize people who have been waiting the longest? And that does not sound like what they're doing, that they're going to triage like the newest cases. Do you think that's the best approach?
I think there's no good approach here. I think the issues are systemic, and I feel for Judge Shaw, and for those who are stuck, like, the judicial system is stuck like us. We're stuck in the system that was built in Olympia, right? The judges have to implement the rules the way the legislature wrote them, and whether we like it or if the judges like it or not, we have certain rules we've got to work through. And sometimes those rules come into conflict, which really puts the bench in a tough spot. So on one hand, the legislature is like, yeah, hear these issues quickly and timely and move along. But at the same time, they institute right to counsel, which makes the whole thing take 7 times as long. I think real reform, in order to fix this, we need to change the way the RCW that governs evictions functions.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to pit you against judges or anything like that. Of course, Judge Shaw was great in explaining all this to us last week. I did ask him one thing, though, that I'm curious to get your opinion on. I had asked him, you've got the right to counsel. So you've got Housing Justice Project attorneys being assigned to help some of the tenants. And what we've been told by some landlords is they feel like those attorneys are intentionally delaying cases for as long as they can. I asked Judge Shaw if that's something that they've seen, and he said no. But if they had reason to believe that's what was happening, they would reject efforts to delay cases. What do you think that's happening? Do you think there are intentional efforts to delay so tenants can stay longer?
With all due respect to the presiding judge, in my practice and what I hear at the Rental Housing Association is that there are delay tactics that are used by the other side that, and by the other side, what I mean is housing justice, to prolong a person's tenancy in a property. And I think that's a function of the way housing justice looks at the court process, that any minute that the tenant stays in the unit is a minute that person is maintaining their housing and therefore is a win, right? The housing justice lawyers look at it as any moment that person's not evicted from that home is a win for their client. And they, as lawyers, and this is what happens when you get lawyers, lawyers are obligated to zealously advocate for their client. The larger question systemically is that the best option for their client long-term? And is it the best option for our housing systems, right? Because every minute that tenant is sitting in a unit that they can't afford to pay for and is running up the tab on a housing provider, it ends up to that. And in the end, that tenant ends up owing the money because there's no getting around that. So a lot of these tenants walk away with massive judgments that will chase them for years down the line. And then also that housing unit goes away at the end, especially if it's from a small housing provider, because they will just sell the unit because they don't want to have that happen to them again. And now we're in a housing crisis with not enough units, right, to begin with, and we're having the judicial system systematically remove more and more units from the market, which is not good for anyone, renters or housing providers. So again, I think that the larger issue isn't that the judges aren't working hard enough or they don't see the inherent tension between the parties. It's that the judges are stuck implementing a system built in Olympia that was designed to do this.
Yep.
This is what the system was designed to do.
Well, that's what happens when politicians, dictate things down to the rest of us without input, without real input and asking the questions that need to be asked of the people who they need to be asked to. Just one more question on this, Sean. So you mentioned, and I think we acknowledge, the judges are going to do what the judges can do, and they've taken some steps. Is there anything else at this juncture you think that is in their control, absent political interests, that Judge Shaw could do that would help even more?
I would like to see a procedural stakeholder panel. I would like to see I would like to see Housing Justice and a group of the Landlord Association lawyers sit down with either presiding or one of the other, maybe the commissioners, and say, what can we do to avoid some of these constant continuances, and if there's a way we can, just even a good example, but just having the defenses filed ahead of time would be great, because oftentimes what happens is that the housing provider walks into the show cause hearing and has no idea what they're defending against, and so it sort of becomes a trial by ambush, right? And so if we could figure out a way to make the system more fair and more efficient, right? So at least we knew what we were talking about at any given hearing. Because as it is now, we have a lot of hearings to just continue hearings.
Yeah, waste of time.
Is not efficient use of the court's time, nor the housing provider's time, nor housing justice time. So if we could sit down and try to hammer something like that out, I think that would be a great next step.
I agree. All right. This is not the last time we're going to talk about this, obviously, but, a little bit helps for sure. So, Sean Flynn, we appreciate your time as always.
Thanks so much. You have a great day.
Again, Sean Flynn there with the Rental Housing Association of Washington. And, he credit to the courts. I think they acted a little too late. And I mentioned that to Judge Shaw last week, that, what was really stopping you from doing this? I think they could have done this probably months ago to try to speed up the process of getting hearings for these landlords and tenants. As Sean pointed out, if you're a tenant and the Housing Justice Project is like, yeah, just keep delaying it, we'll keep getting it delayed for you. And then what? In 2 years, you've got some big back judgment against you. How are you going to pay it? How are you going to get another place to live? So it's not doing a service to the tenants either. If you're going to get evicted, the best scenario is a quick resolution. And then you both move on. So the judges are doing what the judges can do right now. It's up to lawmakers in Olympia. And hopefully there's been enough shame around this issue to say you're going to hurt the availability of housing for renters if you keep this up. It's not fair. Like, that's someone's property. They've put reasonable, rules in place, like you have to pay your rent to live here. They don't want to kick someone out on the streets, but they shouldn't be forced to continue to house someone who has refused to pay rent for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 2 years, whatever it is. That just doesn't make sense. Come on, Democrats in Olympia. That just doesn't make sense. Let's fix it. And let's fix it soon. That segment is brought to you in partnership with the Rental Housing Association of Washington. We've been talking to them every week to try to maintain attention on this issue so it doesn't fade from the news. And if you're a landlord in Washington, join the RHA, because they can help you deal with some of these stupid laws that you're being forced to deal with. So rhawa.org, rhawa.org.